not with Zelda. Nothing is done by popularity. Think about it, you are the only you in the world. Some groups will say Adventure of Link sucks, some groups will say Ocarina of Time is the greatest Zelda game of all time. But at the end of the day, it's by how you interpret it is how you're going to enjoy what you're seeing, and no one else. Last time I went over my favorite Zelda dungeons, and like I said, you may like or hate my choices, but that's the point. No one thinks the same. So now it's time to flip the tables on Zelda dungeons with this list. But now there are a few additional rules this time around since we're going into something sensitive like this. First, no easy targets. I won't pick first dungeons because they're dungeons designed to make it easy for newcomer players to get them adjusted to the game, but that's no reason to hate them. Second, this is good-natured fun. Every Zelda player does this. They talk about what makes each temple awesome and what makes others miserable. There's nothing weird or mean-spirited about doing things like this. Think of it like a museum tour. I'm simply showing you around to the art pieces in the Zelda museum that don't appeal to me. I'm sure if you were the tour guide, it would be a whole new adventure. But that's what makes these tours so fun, right? Because it's a unique treat every time. It's why we watch countdowns, because it's never the same. Third, at any point, I am not going to disrespect any Zelda opinions who enjoy these temples I'm going to list. The reason I'm saying this is that I'm going to say things like, I really hate this music, or use a louder voice. I am not trying to attack your opinions personally. I'm simply saying why I personally didn't enjoy it with a tone to back it up. That's all. You can't get the message of hating things with a boring voice. Alright, we've seen my best, now let's see my worst. Are you ready? I'll get the lighter ready. Hold on. Beattys Palace from Four Swords. Because I haven't played the Four Swords Anniversary Edition and I'm not able to play Four Swords or the Anniversary Edition right now, I can't pick a dungeon for this list. I could browse through the videos like I did for the like side, but I saw nothing throughout the footage that would tick me off or look disappointing to consider anything for this list. However, I will say this, but it's not because of the dungeon itself, it's that the boss battle from Beattys Palace looked very disappointing, and I have played this before on the original Four Swords 10 years ago, so I can't qualify this. But keep in mind, this is the boss I'm ratting out on, because I was pushed into a corner to find something to hate. But Beattys Palace in itself is an incredible dungeon on all fronts, like every level out there. The boss battle is terrible. Beatty hovers above the party, mindlessly moving around with a tornado, and because of this, all four links can chuck up as many bombs as they want to up the chute and he'll go down in seconds. The second form is a little better since it involves teamwork, but it makes for the most disappointing final boss in Zelda history. Alright, now we have the forced nitpick out of the way, which involved a boss and not a dungeon. But since the boss battle is part of the dungeon, I'll let it slide into the bottom rank. But, well, as for the others... The Temple of Time from Twilight Princess. Okay, Twilight Princess, I defended you front and back. You have immersive elements, you have great dungeons, great detail, great concepts, but the Temple of Time doesn't reflect any of those things. It feels like other than the nostalgic throwback from Ocarina of Time, this dungeon doesn't have anything going for it. Now this is where my bias comes in. As long as the music is good, especially with a gem like this, then I can sit down and pray through this dungeon despite its flaws. It's amazing how music will make or break a dungeon for me in making it bearable, which is why this is pretty low. There's that nice music to soothe your ears through this bad dungeon. In fact, it's in my top 50 Zelda songs of all time. Nudge, nudge. Before I get to the negatives, I want to say something. I actually like this temple quite a bit. I think it's a decent temple and nothing in it really drives me up the wall about it. It's more of a if I had to choose a dungeon to hate dungeon, but I honestly don't hate it, but I can describe why it's a little lower to me compared to the other temples. The environment is a little too formal for my taste. The puzzles weren't to my liking, especially with the follow the leader puzzle with the rod. I'm not a fan of straightforward dungeons, and unfortunately this to me feels a bit to me like one of those in my opinion. Again, I think it's a decent dungeon, but it is my least favorite dungeon in Twilight Princess. Snakes remains from Oracle of Seasons. So I can't pick the first dungeon, and the rest of the dungeons in Oracle of Seasons are just so good. So many cool toys, excellent dungeons, I can't bear to pick any of them. However, Oracle of Seasons also doesn't get going at all until the third dungeon, so by process of elimination we're left with the second dungeon. So how does the dungeon fail? Okay, the first dungeon we can forgive for being easy and barren to any Zelda game, but no, not here. Every dungeon is supposed to be progressive and add more interesting and difficult concepts from the last one, but the Snakes Remains is unique in that it failed to progress in any way. Difficulty, none. Interest, no. Item, nada. This place is an empty storage shed with no strategy. Thankfully, here's a couple of good news with this case. The first and second dungeons in this game are extremely short, and in this case this is why it's slow, is that the pain doesn't last long, about 10 minutes, and the dungeon itself doesn't exactly tick me off, so I don't really hate it. It's more a disappointing vibe I get rather than anything in it that personally brushes me a bit about it. But still, think of what's happening here. If I find a second dungeon disappointing, and that is supposed to be easy in a Zelda game, and I notice something wrong, that's a problem. Nobody likes going on training wheels. It's fine for the first dungeon, but most of us want to go off and go explore. So keeping them on for the second dungeon kind of bums me out. But again, not really a big deal compared to the further entries by a long shot. More of a nitpick really. The Eagle's Tower from Link's Awakening. It's amazing how doing lists like these change your opinions of Zelda games. When I went through the Link's Awakening dungeons, there wasn't anything I particularly liked, but I didn't find anything I hated at all either. So having to go into super nitpick mode, if there's one thing I had to choose I didn't like, it was from the Eagle's Tower. The Eagle's Tower in itself is an incredible dungeon, arguably the hardest and one of the favorites, and it should be my favorite since I like challenging dungeons, but I didn't exactly like the end result. You see, the objective of this dungeon is to take this wrecking ball and knock down 4 pillars to get this dungeon done. At this point the dungeon is fulfilling and well thought out, but Link's Awakening has some really anticlimactic bosses in my opinion, including ones like the anglerfish, so put in a good couple of hours and you would expect a great boss to keep this level of entertainment going, but no. It's a stupid bird with a stupid villain in a stupid predictable fight. Again, this is going into nitpick extreme, but when the dungeon was done, I felt unfulfilled, drained, and disappointed. It had the right tools, a great dungeon, a great concept, great difficulty. I understand it's a Game Boy game with limitations, but that last nail didn't go in right, so to me, not a good highlight for me. The Mermaids Palace from Adventure of Link. What happened to you, Adventure of Link? Your momentum started picking up with the Island Palace. It had a nice increase of challenge, puzzles, and changing things up a bit, and then the 4th dungeon right after took a small nosedive. It's more a disappointment than something I'm genuinely mad at, but it's definitely something I noticed. The first problem came with this corridor. Looks innocent enough, right? But this is repeated twice. No challenge here. Disappointing. This puzzle here is done twice, but it's the same puzzle from Island Palace. No innovation here. Disappointing. Next, it isn't longer branches out enough, and I happen to pick the right direction to breeze right through it compared to the other dungeons. Now here's the cake. Whiz ropes aren't threatening. They disappear in your face and you can get around their fireballs easily, removing their challenge. This is mocked so badly with Karok, the boss of the dungeon where you simply put down your shield and watch the show in one of the worst Zelda bosses ever created. I've got the first part of the top 288 Zelda bosses to back that up. Thankfully, every dungeon is satisfying, which makes this dungeon's flaws stand out more. Some may ask, why not put the Great Palace on here? Well, at least they gave you the decency of putting a checkpoint there, which is perfect to compensate for how far and hard that dungeon is. But the Mermaids Palace, don't repeat elements, be original, and keep the difficulty up like the rest of Adventure of Link. That's all I ask for. The Marine Temple from Spirit Tracks. Usually in Spirit Tracks there's a gimmick that gets expanded on in a dungeon. For example, one gives you the boomerang, but the ice flame you hit affects water. Nice. Another one involves redirecting arrows with the bow. Not too shabby. Another one involves the sand wand with moving around rolling spiked bridges. Definitely a thumbs up. Now the Marine Temple, afraid not. Now to explain this dungeon and its gimmick, you get the whip down the line and can start using it to cross gaps by swinging across them. And that's it. Nothing is innovated with it. The entirety of the temple is revolved around using this whip left and right just for monotonous bridge substituting and thorn picking. Now I've heard the argument in the Zelda series when a weapon becomes useless after the dungeon is complete. But in this case, it's used so much in the dungeon itself, I don't want to use it after this dungeon. Now picture that you have the Megaton hammer from Ocarina of Time and used it 50 times on 50 switches all in a row in a dungeon. This is what the whip feels like. Unoriginality overload. That's all this dungeon is. Gaps. Gaps, 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 and more gaps. I get it, there's gaps. Plus add on that the uninteresting boss involved with more gaps, more thorn picking, which is extremely unimpressive too and didn't expand on the whip much. Just add a twist! That's all you had to do, Marine Temple. Just spruce it up a bit, but alas, you did not. So you must suffer on my list. The Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time. As I said before in my other list, when you play this game so many times, it pushes you into a desensitized gutter that not many Zelda players will understand. So the Forest Temple, at first it was my favorite temple for a while. The 4 ghost concept was great. It's a really eerie and immersive dungeon. The puzzles were really something else. And then many playthroughs later, the negatives that seemed so small at the time when I first played the Forest Temple started to come back to haunt me through later playthroughs. So first the music. When I heard it the first time, it subconsciously reminded me of Sheik grunting. Listen closely. So that got annoying. At first it was great at how it gave off this creepy vibe, but this instrument right here started to really get on my nerves over time. Plus add on that the other instrument, which sounds like it drones on, it's a very distracting piece of music to my ears. Also, the environment hasn't been growing on me either. Over time, I started to realize how colorful and refreshing all of the other dungeons were. Yes, including the Shadow Temple. And then I look back at this and say, it's very unique, and maybe that's why I liked it so much the first couple of playthroughs. But overall, I think I prefer the consistent themes the other dungeons had in the long run, in my opinion. I broke my nostalgia goggles with this game, and I still think it's a great game, but I've lost my fondness for it. And to be brutally honest, it felt like the only reason I liked this temple in the first place was only because of nostalgia. But now looking at the temple objectively with my own opinion, I consider it far inferior to every other Zelda temple, including the Water Temple by a long shot. But remember that this is my opinion. If you love the Forest Temple, great. Don't let me hold you back on that thought, and I mean no disrespect. You have every right to enjoy the Forest Temple as much as you do. The Mermaids Cave from Oracle of Ages. I've been blind for so many years. Why did I not see this? On the surface, the Mermaids Cave looks like one of the best out there in Oracle of Ages because of its concept to enter the dungeon both from the past and the present. But past that positive, this actually isn't a well thought out dungeon at all in my opinion. You see, because the dungeon is split between past and present, there are essentially 2 dungeons here, which sounds awesome, but we're left with 2 disappointing subpar dungeons in that wake. I think Oracle of Ages is an ambitious game with its puzzles, but I think they focus too much on the grand scheme rather than the little detailed pieces in this case, which I had to say isn't a good approach compared to the other dungeons. These 2 dungeons are cakewalks. There's no puzzles, barely any enemies, and these dungeons put up the resistance of opening an unlocked door. Yes, that easy in the 6th dungeon of all places. The most excitement comes from getting the item from one side while finishing the dungeon in the other. Plus add on that the mini boss and the boss isn't as exhilarating as other Oracle of Ages dungeons with its usual whoa standard. Not a good call. This taught me something. Just because something has a unique gimmick for it doesn't automatically make it a good thing if it isn't executed gracefully. Like all Zelda games, every, and I mean every Zelda game, does have their triumphs and flaws. And well, Oracle of Ages, you're not perfect either. I'll still love you, but you're a Zelda game and have shortcomings just like the rest of your family. Though, I have to admit, it is an impressive concept, and the puzzles are still there as they should be, which is why this is number 11. It still did alright in my books. The Ice Runes from Link Between Worlds. Now I bet from my last video that you expected me to have a loaded cannon ready for this game, but if all the dungeons are similar in execution, then there's not really a lot to go off of to simply pick one out to hate on it. Do I enjoy the dungeons? No, not really. However, Ice Runes gives me a sickening feeling about it. No, it seriously does. First thing I did when I entered this dungeon is to write the blocks down to different levels. Now I never ever get motion sickness in video games, but as the block moved between floors with Link writing on it, my stomach squirmed a bit every time the camera made a sudden jolt up and down between the floors. I wouldn't call it a graceful move from the dungeon. Next, and this is big as well, is the design of the place. Usually I like ice dungeons, and I don't mind at all the designs of the other dungeons, but this is cringeworthy. Whenever I look at the horribly contrasted ice floor or the dark blue bridges that have snowflake emblems, it doesn't contribute to the natural feel of the dungeon at all in my opinion. It looks dreadful in that respect. This dungeon just looks and feels wrong. Instead of using authentic snow and ice, it felt like the developers wanted to scribble snowflakes around and say, "This is an ice dungeon," but this is not subtle or immersive. This is like me putting up a caption to say, "This is a caption." Of course you know what a caption is. This is rubbing the obvious in your face, and this is what this dungeon represents to me. Rubbing the obvious in my face and also rubbing my stomach the wrong way. The Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. I honestly don't know where to start. I imagine this is one of those situations where any explanation I give off won't satisfy some, because this dungeon is universally praised and it's one of those you have to like it because everyone does, like Ocarina of Time. Gotta love the internet, but let's give it a go. The Zelda community revolves around respecting others' opinions, and I have faith in that. Besides, it's a dungeon like any other dungeon, so it's fair game. Let's start slow. I don't like the design to this dungeon. I think you should know that I don't like art museums, and this dungeon reminds me a lot of one of those. Also, when you look off into the distance of the dungeon, it looks really blurry and foggish. Also, when I picture dark, scary, adventurous dungeons in the Zelda universe, a peaceful dungeon isn't something I have in mind. It's just something I'm not a fan of at all. I like my dungeons more threatening and more serious tone heavy. It's just something I prefer, that's all. Next, as you've guessed from my last countdown, I like when dungeons get tough, and I don't mind them getting easy at all with difficulty and puzzles, but there's nothing exciting that comes from the Ancient Cistern in my opinion. Literally the whole time I was taking a small jog, climbing vines, doing an easy swim, or riding the water channels. If it feels more like an overworld landscape obstacle rather than the standards of a dungeon, then that's when I draw the line on the dungeon being competent in that category. I had this criticism with the Fire Sanctuary and a couple of other Skyward Sword dungeons too, so it's not just just this one. Nope, still have a few more weeds to address. This dungeon doesn't have an interesting concept going for it, but remember that this is my opinion and not fact. To me, the water temple had water levels, the lake bed temple had rotating staircases, the great bay temple had switching currents, but here it's just a goldfish bowl's worth of water with lily pads. I'm sorry, but I've seen lily pads and these other details in video games before, and they aren't fascinating to me when presented this way. It makes the dungeon a very boring place to be and look at. And remember that I don't like art museums, so I'm not into that "it's beautiful and everyone should appreciate it" standpoint. I like adventures, not looks. This place has looks plastered all over the place. Now this brings up the basement of the dungeon that some might use as a rebuttal, at which I'll use the same response. To me, it's just looks. There's little adventure value here for me. It doesn't change how the temple runs in terms of mechanics. It was just put there to be there. If it changed the gameplay in any way I haven't seen yet in Skyward Sword, then yes, go for it. But I've climbed ropes, I've swung my sword and killed enemies, I've jumped on lily pads, and I've run past enemies. Nothing new is added gameplay wise. Lastly, you have no water gear, unlike the other Zelda games, which questions its definition as a water dungeon in my opinion. You have no Zora tunic, no iron boots, nothing to navigate or explore the water concept further, and you have a kiddie pool's worth of water compared to the other water dungeons. Just because there's a little water there doesn't classify it as a water dungeon to my standards. Overall, I think this is the best water dungeon for other Zelda players. It looks great, the tedium is kept down to 0, and it's a very enjoyable dungeon for many. With me, and no offense with the reasons I talked about, I look at this water dungeon compared to the others and say, it's just not as adventurous for my taste compared to those other water dungeons. It's more like an innocent castle water park rather than an adventurous, threatening, dark dungeon, at which in my opinion doesn't seem too coherent to what a dungeon should be. The Tower of the Gods from Wind Waker. Okay, I'm not going to lie. The music sounds like Metroid music to me. It really does. It really does sound like Metroid music to me. But that's not what makes it so bothersome. The music holds this consistently high build-up pitch, and the fading is a little weird. But when it's put down into a dungeon, it just makes it anticlimactic and unnecessary for my taste. Second, I don't like errand or follow the leader puzzles in video games. Half of this dungeon involves going down a hallway chamber for a bit from the main room, to bringing back these tiki-like statues to learn things like the command melody or opening up more of the dungeon. These aren't fulfilling at all and just drag things out just like my Temple of Time entry. Next, getting the hero's bow. It's not really used a lot to great effect compared to other items in Wind Waker. It's just there to zap out an eye or two or to combat a Wizrobe off to a distance in my opinion. So pile-on platforming I'm not too fond of, tiki statue escort missions, a weird spontaneous water level gimmick which I can't say I enjoy either, underwhelming objectives to get things moving forward, too simple of a toy like the bow, and I'm sorry but I can't say I'm a fan of the place. Godan isn't any better at all as a ripoff of Bonga Bonga from Ocarina of Time. For something that is supposedly supposed to be your final challenge, this is something that's more first boss material. Overall, I like Wind Waker's dungeons a lot. I normally enjoy them all on how relaxing they are, but this one is distracting, boring, and just dragged. Thankfully, it's only one dungeon from Wind Waker that bothered me. I love the rest of them. Oh, crap. The Village of the Blue Maiden from Four Swords Adventures. Yes, I'm counting this as a dungeon. 1, I don't care because I hate this place so much, and 2, you could consider any level on your dungeon since it involves getting from point A to point Z like every other linear Four Swords Adventures level. Village, dungeon, whatever. I am going to tear this place apart. It's my list, so I can do whatever I want. So contrary to what many Zelda players believe, it's important to keep the pacing in Four Swords Adventures going fast and active at all times. Some may complain about the lack of puzzles and exploration, but in a 4-player game, that's a no-no. Just imagine if you're playing Turtles in Time and was asked to stop their progress to look for something in a level. You want to keep the action going, not to stop to do something boring, to search for something. So the Village of the Blue Maiden directly goes against everything what Four Swords Adventure stands for. You get to explore around a village and get to pull a big Goron sword side quest in this game from Ocarina of Time, from going from one place to another in a dead-end village with so little clues on what to do next. It's insulting. You might as well change this game to The Legend of Zelda Scooby-Doo Edition. Now I picture if you have 3 friends with you pulling up every bush and checking every corner, it's not too tough since you're going through it 4 times as fast. But the Zelda franchise is revolved and built around single player. So like the stubborn fools we are and wanting to solve puzzles without anyone else's help, this one might take well around an hour if your worst case scenario to getting this done, maybe longer. This level is designed for group investigation, not for a single player run. I can prove this because I played this through with 2 other friends and we got through just fine, but myself, I suck so bad at finding everything. The moral of the story, Zelda fans, don't get mixed up in what should be in a Zelda game and what should be in a multiplayer game. Putting in exploration in a multiplayer game is an outstandingly bad idea, so it fails on that front in terms of momentum killing. In a single player experience, at which I'm guessing which most Zelda players have done, it fails because there's not enough manpower to root things out fast enough in a level where more players will definitely help out in a longer shot in getting this done. It dropped the ball on both fronts. So because it failed as a Zelda and exploration concept versus the fluid gameplay of multiplayer, this level will become a hideous chore for anyone playing this level. Turtle Rock from A Link to the Past. Do you remember me saying in my top 17 Zelda games that I beat A Link to the Past once and almost twice? Well, that's because I stopped at this dungeon. In fact, it was here at Trinix where I rage quitted. This is because I'm not a resource management guy at all and never carry around green juice to replenish my magic. So I came in here with empty bottles. So how this dungeon goes is that you use your key to generate platforms and move around. I'm not a fan of this or the warp pipe system. It's really frustrating in moments, and I wish there was a shop around to buy some green magic potion if something like this is around. I don't know if there is, but slapping me with a dungeon where I suddenly need magic out of nowhere and without warning is a poor game decision in my opinion for my circumstances. Yes, there's plenty of magic around in pots, which is fine, but there is none when it comes to the boss with Trinix. At this time I had an empty magic bar with no bottles of magic, and every time I repeated this boss, 1 bar of magic isn't enough. So next I looked around to find more bottles, which meant getting off of Death Mountain, where I worked hard to hike up to go all the way back to town to get more magic, then hike all the way back to Turtle Rock. Just no. I refuse to. This is a game breaker for me. I'm not a diehard fan of A Link to the Past to go through something stupid like this just to complete the last leg of the game. Just remember, this is my personal experience. It may not bother you, maybe it does. Maybe you'll point out a shop I didn't find involving magic, but for me, not a favorite memory at all from the series. The Palace of Winds from Minish Cap. Now this one's a surprise even for me. When I went into the dungeon, I had this rocks cape and I was jumping up, down, left, right, all around the clouds, having a blast with the wind puzzles. This dungeon is fun! I love this! This is going to be a great dungeon. Until, after about 10 minutes, this dungeon, out of everyone on this list, just drags. It just drags, and drags, and drags on! It gets my award for being the draggiest dungeon in the series. Now let's look at the unique concept. It's a marathon run that adds great build up for the last dungeon, and I say, yeah, you're right. To that, it could easily be your favorite dungeon. Now this was a moment where I had to stare at this dungeon for a long time and figure out why I hate it so much. The difficulty is nice, the puzzles are great, the build-up is there, the variety is around, but I think where I don't like it is the lack of branching paths from the Temple of Time entry, the monotony of one item from the Marine Temple, and the padding of obstacles from the Tower of the Gods. Even though the dungeon was changing up its scheme all the time, at which I have to give this dungeon a lot of credit for, I don't care, because that's not a positive I consider when the negatives are breathing that close to my face with what I just mentioned. It's straightforward, which I don't like. It's overusing an item, which I don't like. Some obstacles are too similar and repetitious, like the clouds and cages, which I don't like. Tack on that this is 30 minutes long, this dungeon drains my soul, and I rage quit from it often, making it really hard for me to finish Minish Cap nowadays. I'm also not a fan of the music as well. It sounds more like a desert theme rather than a sky theme. Add that with how long this dungeon is, and it won't be a fun ride for the ears. The only thing I could boast about is the Gorg pair, which is an outstanding boss, but pit how much time is spent in the dungeon versus the boss, it doesn't compare. The dungeon itself will keep me bleeding for a long time. So I saw the plan they were doing here, and they executed it spectacularly. But I don't like the presentation of quantity over quality in this case. The music isn't up my alley, it's way too long for its own good, and overall, go away. The Stone Tower Temple from Majora's Mask is my worst 3D Zelda dungeon of all time. So ever since top 17 Zelda games, I decided to head back and finish Majora's Mask, since it was one of the 2 games I haven't completed. And I wished I didn't. After playing the Stone Tower Temple for 15 minutes, I stopped playing Majora's Mask entirely and didn't want to finish it. Now, you know me, I'm not one to throw things out there randomly, so let me explain a bit. So one of the things I hear about with the Water Temple from Ocarina of Time is that the music is hypnotizing and the monotony of it puts you to sleep. I can agree with that. It's a really slow, uninteresting song to some. I don't mind it, but that's personal taste. However, the Stone Tower Temple's music gets the award for me for being the most monotonous song of all time from the Zelda series. It just drains my soul to no end. Again, this boils down to personal taste. You either love it or you hate it. No ifs, ands, or buts will ever change preferences. It's a golden rule of being an individual. I don't care about this temple's design at all either. Like the music, this is subjective. I understand to some Zelda players that it's supposed to be this bland death theme to emphasize the environment, and I respect your opinion if this is the case. Now I could talk about the intricate puzzles, but I didn't get this far in the dungeon and I don't want to. All I saw was using the tedious elegy of emptiness a few annoying times and the temple flipping over. When the temple flipped over, I was already zoned out with the music and design and with my interest getting zapped to 0. It wasn't enough to save me from the inconsistent boredom to get in my good books in any respect at all. Plus, I've heard the rumors. Twin Mold isn't really a good boss, the dungeon drags if you're not a fan of it. I watched through the dungeon on YouTube and not a fan of the complicated puzzles designs and extreme backtracking at all. And now top it off with what I mainly don't like about Majora's Mask. The timer. The timer. The timer. The timer. One more thing before I close. A thank you for those who respect my opinion. Even though we all get those squeamish feelings in hearing things like this if you happen to like the temple, thank you for saying to yourself, I have a worse 3D dungeon I absolutely hate too. You are my friends, thank you for your support. I completely respect which temples you like and hate, and we can't choose what we naturally like and don't like in these Zelda games. So thank you for your support in these sensitive situations. The the Dragon Dungeon, or Dungeon 6 from The Legend of Zelda. So I imagine that everyone expects me to be this top hardcore gamer since I've beaten Zelda 2, but I think it's more about what types of games you're good at. In my case, my beta control comes from the original Legend of Zelda game. I play this game quite a bit and I can never ever get the hang of the control. And now add that brick wall and Dungeon 6, then we'll have some major problems here. The Wizrobes. These Wizrobes. I've never defeated a room full of Wizrobes. I've never got past this room in the dungeon, and this is about the 5th room. Every time I enter rooms full of Wizrobes or Darknuts, I'll just die. I really am that bad at the game. Now combine that with my intense perseverance from Super Mario 64 Chaos Edition to try beating the dungeon, then
and shove them right up your and then on your with in the and your so then you'll have to sideways.
This is why the original Legend of Zelda is my least favorite Zelda game of all time. I suck at the controls, I suck at navigating, I suck at fighting, I suck at scavenging, along with a few design choices I didn't like when it comes to dying in a dungeon. Why give me 3 hearts on respawning? That's really stupid, especially on retrying Dungeon 6 since these Wizrobes are found early, and then I ended up rage quitting from the game for good. It was here, is where my resting place is with the Legend of Zelda. I probably saved myself a rant video just by pointing those out. Now I know there is this argument that I could have got better equipment or that I could have done this or could have done that, but let me ask you something. If I suck at the game, don't like backtracking or scavenging like this, if I am not impressed with the concept, where would my enjoyment ever come from in ever wanting to finish this game? Think of it like Battletoads level 3 with the bikes. I could pass that level easily, but what if I told you to do this or do that, but if you suck at it like I do with The Legend of Zelda, then why keep playing it if it is so impossibly aggravating it saps every inch of your sanity out? But I will say this, The Legend of Zelda had its fun moments going through it and figuring out where everything is at, but when it comes to Dungeon 6, the bottom of the well from Master Quest. Very few know about this place. The trollness. The trollness. The trollness. For those who say that the water temple is bad from Ocarina of Time have not played the bottom of the well from Master Quest. Here, I'll let you guess how long it took me to beat it. 2 hours? Probably where the water temple is? Nope. 3 hours? Nope. 4 to 5 hours? This deceptively easy dungeon took me 4 to 5 hours to beat it. You probably think I'm kidding. I'm not. The bottom of the well adds on a false sense of progression because you'll be opening chests that contain nothing as sporadic moments. In other words, this dungeon trolls you in thinking you're making progress, but you're making diddly squat for hours until you find the lens of truth. But wait a second, Slashstar, isn't it where the mini-boss is? No. And so you think that it's gotta be in a chest around the dungeon, but here's the catch. It's invisible to the naked eye and the map, at which you need the lens of truth to find the lens of truth. That is the most convoluted trolling I've ever seen in a video game. The dungeon keeps waving the lens of truth out of your reach like you're a hamster trying to get out of a cage for hours, and you're never going to get it because you can't see how much progress you're making. You have chests that troll you with useless items, and after adding on hours of feeling like you've done nothing to get things moving forward, it's not a happy journey. This is far from one of those situations where you find something where you celebrate and get satisfaction. This is one of those situations where you wonder what the heck did you do with your life for the past 4 hours. Knowing a problem got translated from 5 to 10 minutes from Ocarina of Time to 4 hours in Master Quest just because a chest is invisible is the most screwed up thing in Zelda history. That's right, I said in Zelda history. Official or unofficial, this is the worst. Master Quest is, in my opinion, a game that shouldn't be uncovered by many Zelda fans. This game will haunt you, it will kick you, players know when they play this game that they are in that crazy zone and want pain and suffering. Some pain is good, it makes you stronger, which is what I like from Master Quest because it's challenging. So there's the good pain in this game. And then there's that brutally unnecessary pain of kicking the horse over, killing it, and continuing to kick it, and Bottom of the Well indeed does this. Because I am not going through this mod again because I've forgotten where the lens of truth is. A single dungeon glares at me from a distance enough, my number 2 entry, to never pick up and finish this game again. Now you must think the water temple is a million times worse in this version. Well, in the Master Quest mod, it is now the easiest dungeon in the game now. Ironic, huh? Nice way to add the cherry on top there, Master Quest. The Temple of the Ocean King, the series from Phantom Hourglass. There is no excuse for this. None. Nothing at all. Phantom Hourglass does deserve its love for what it does right, but it does get a lot of hate, and I personally think it deserves it just because of the series of dungeons on its overall execution. For those who don't know, I'll fill you in. The Temple of the Ocean King is a hub dungeon where every time you come back to it, you go a little farther into its depths every time. But there is no checkpoint system, and the puzzles reset every time you come back to it, meaning you have to redo your progress from square one every time, plus a little more each time you come back. Now add on that you do this 6 times, here's a way to put it into perspective. Imagine you're playing a Mega Man game and beat a single Robot Master. Now imagine the next time you have to repeat the first one, then do the second one. Okay? You can grit your teeth and do it, but it isn't fun. Now for the 3rd time, you have to redo the first, the second, and then the 3rd. Now the Ocean King does this pattern 6 times. 6 times. Just, Okay, so let's be fair for a moment and talk to the Phantom Hourglass players for a moment. I agree. Phantom Hourglass is a great Zelda game in its own right and atmosphere. And the reason I personally don't hate this dungeon so much is because I paced myself evenly over time, doing a section of the Ocean King in between another day so it didn't drag. However, Phantom Hourglass players, there is one argument we can't ever get around for those who hate this game just because of this dungeon. Some gamers prefer playing their video games longer than others, and some play them for shorter times. Now picture a Zelda player who wants to play through this game in one big long play session. The Ocean King is going to keep rubbing its one overwhelming flaw in their faces maliciously, and this can't happen. This is my biggest point and why I think the Temple of the Ocean King is the worst Zelda dungeon of all time. The developers looked at this and literally said, okay, we'll let this slide. You know, in video editing, it's very important to do the quality over quantity approach. Editing is a top-notch tool to keep something entertaining, and it should be basic knowledge to keeping things professional. And well, we're looking at the opposite. They didn't edit. They let the quantity in. This is sloppy, this is F-grade material, and this isn't professional. And you know all you had to do, Nintendo, to keep the floor intact underneath you when it came to this game? A checkpoint system. Phantom Hourglass would have avoided the label by some to be the worst Zelda of all time if all you had to do is follow the simple, essential rule. Alright, we're done. Both sides of the Zelda dungeons are done. It was really fun to do this list. Thanks for requesting it. It was good to dip into Zelda again. Will I be doing more? Certainly. I could do a songs countdown. I have some reviews down the line, but for now I've got to finish up the top 10 things I like and hate in video games. It's not fun to leave people hanging with just the first half. We'll see where it goes from there. Thanks for stopping by and thanks for watching. Ciao! Men Sarge's Heroes is most often panned for its controls and camera. To that, I say I agree with you. Sarge takes forever to bring his gun up to shoot it while standing still, and the camera will try mutilating your butt whenever it can. Is that Link is absolutely crazy in this game. Look at this. Look at this. Thankfully this isn't common, but when it matters, it'll really start kicking you in the legs. It's not a heavy crotch shot, but they'll either do two things that will follow up with that is just as unforgiving. One, they'll try twisting your leg because teams can't stand on their own 2 feet to get you to join them, or two, they'll try breaking them off because they have no souls. Well, a leg for a leg. Who doesn't want one of these? Stallard's first form. Stallard's first form! It's flawless. Everything is maxed out. Take your pick. Design, difficulty, the engagement, the strategy, the music. 100%. I don't think this boss could be hated. This is the standout boss from Twilight Princess. Go to every top 5 or top 10 Zelda bosses countdown and you'll see him there. Just like books or movies, video games are portals where you can leave your couch to get immersed into the world, and what defines video games on what makes them so great is how much you're forgetting that you're holding a controller and getting engrossed in the game that you're playing. Otherwise, I think the game is really fun. I'm glad that it exists. It's a very satisfying side-scrolling game, but that game over screen can sure be one of the biggest killjoys you'll ever see in video game history, and I'm no different. It sucks to lose progress.